38 meters below the surface of the sea. Cold, dark, and under enormous pressure. And somewhere in the middle, two drilling machines approaching each other from opposite directions. One from England, one from France, each the size of a battleship. And if their calculations were even slightly off, they would never meet. This is the story of the Channel Tunnel, one of the most ambitious, most dangerous, and most financially disastrous engineering projects ever attempted. A tunnel that took over 200 years of dreaming, 13,000 workers, and a near bankruptcy to complete. And yet, it changed the world forever. Let's go back to the beginning. The idea of connecting England and France beneath the English Channel is not a modern one. It was first seriously proposed in 1802 by a French engineer named Albert Mathieu, who wanted to build a tunnel lit by oil lamps with horse-drawn carriages carrying passengers underground. He even presented the idea to Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon loved it. After all, a tunnel under the Channel would make invading England significantly easier. The British, of course, were not so enthusiastic. Over the following 180 years, the idea was proposed, studied, started, and abandoned over and over again. In 1881, engineers from both sides actually began digging, and got about 2 kilometers in before the British government panicked and ordered the project stopped. They feared a tunnel would compromise the natural defense provided by the sea. England had never been successfully invaded since 1066. The Channel was their moat, and they weren't about to fill it in. For another 100 years, the tunnel remained a dream. Then, in 1984, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and French President François Mitterrand shook hands on a deal. The Channel Tunnel would be built, not by governments, but by private companies. The project would be funded entirely by private investors. No taxpayer money, no government safety net, just private capital betting on the greatest engineering project of the century. The contract was signed in 1986. Construction would begin in 1988. The tunnel was supposed to open in 1993. The budget was set at £4.8 billion. None of those numbers would turn out to be accurate. The engineering challenge was staggering. The Channel Tunnel is not one tunnel, it is 3. 2 rail tunnels, each large enough for a full-size train running side by side. And between them, a smaller service tunnel for maintenance, ventilation, and emergency access. All 3 run parallel, 38 meters below the seabed, for a total length of 50 kilometers, 38 of which are underwater. At the time of its construction, it was the longest undersea tunnel in the world. To dig these tunnels, engineers used massive boring machines, called TBMs, or tunnel boring machines. Each one was essentially a giant rotating drill, 8 meters in diameter and over 200 meters long. The cutting head at the front spun slowly, but with enormous force, grinding through the rock. Behind it, a conveyor belt carried the excavated material backward. Concrete segments were simultaneously fitted to the tunnel walls, creating a finished, sealed tube as the machine moved forward. 11 of these machines were deployed in total. 6 from the English side, 5 from the French side. And they all began drilling at the same time, heading toward each other under the sea. Here is where it gets extraordinary. The 2 teams were digging from opposite coastlines, 50 kilometers apart, with no way to see each other or communicate directly in real time. And yet they had to meet, precisely, somewhere in the middle. A miscalculation of even a few centimeters would mean the tunnels would miss each other entirely, somewhere deep under the English Channel. The engineers used a combination of laser guidance systems, gyroscopes, and constant surveying to keep the machines on course. Every meter of progress was measured and recalculated. The tolerances were almost impossibly tight. On the 1st of December 1990, a British worker named Graham Fagg and a French worker named Philippe Cosette broke through the final wall of rock between them and shook hands, 38 meters below the seabed. The 2 sides had met. The error in alignment, Less than 35 centimeters over 50 kilometers of digging. One of the greatest feats of precision engineering in history. But while the tunnels were coming together underground, everything above the surface was falling apart. The project was catastrophically over budget. What was supposed to cost £4.8 billion was now heading toward $10 billion. Costs had more than doubled. The private investors were in panic. Banks threatened to pull funding. The companies involved came dangerously close to bankruptcy. Not once, but multiple times during construction. Workers were laid off, deadlines were extended, contracts were renegotiated. At several points, it genuinely looked like the project would be abandoned, with half-finished tunnels sitting empty under the sea. But they pushed through. And on the 6th of May, 1994, Queen Elizabeth II and President François Mitterrand officially opened the Channel Tunnel. The first passengers traveled through it on the 14th of November that same year. The engineering world celebrated. The financial world was less enthusiastic. The tunnel had cost nearly twice its original budget. It would take decades before it turned a profit. And then, just 2 years after opening, disaster struck. On the 18th of November 1996, a fire broke out inside the tunnel. A truck carrying a load of polystyrene caught fire on one of the freight shuttle trains, midway through the crossing. Flames and thick black smoke filled the tunnel. Temperatures reached over 1,000 degrees Celsius in some sections. Remarkably, all 31 people aboard the train survived. They evacuated into the service tunnel, the smaller middle tube, which had been specifically designed as an escape route. Fresh air was pumped in. Fire doors sealed off the burning section. The evacuation systems worked exactly as designed. But the damage to the tunnel itself was severe. Hundreds of meters of concrete lining had been destroyed. Repairs took 6 months and cost hundreds of millions of pounds. The tunnel was partially closed for nearly a year. It was a terrifying reminder of just how extreme the environment inside the tunnel really is. 38 meters below the sea. No natural light. Limited ventilation. The only way out, a tunnel that itself is on fire. Today, the Channel Tunnel handles around 400 trains per day. High-speed Eurostar passenger trains travel from London to Paris in just 2 hours and 15 minutes. The same journey by sea, on a ferry, takes at least 90 minutes just for the crossing, plus check-in time. The tunnel completely transformed travel between Britain and France. Over 500 million passengers have traveled through it since opening. Hundreds of millions of tons of freight. It has become the busiest international rail link in the world. And yet, the financial story remains complicated. The company that built and operates the tunnel, now called Getlink, only paid its first dividend to shareholders in 2018. 24 years after opening. The investors who funded the project in the 1980s waited a generation to see any return on their money. It is one of the great paradoxes of modern engineering. A project that was an almost total financial disaster and an almost total engineering triumph. The numbers speak for themselves. 13,000 workers, 11 tunnel boring machines, 50 kilometers of tunnel, 38 meters below the seabed, a budget overrun of more than £5 billion, one catastrophic fire, and a construction period that generated more than 8 million cubic meters of excavated material, enough to create an entirely new landmass on the English coastline, which still exists today and is known as Samphire Hoe. The Channel Tunnel is not just a hole in the ground under the sea. It is proof of what humans can accomplish when they refuse to give up. Even when the money runs out, even when the fire starts, even when 200 years of failed attempts suggest that maybe it simply cannot be done. The French and British engineers met in the middle, 38 meters under the ocean, less than 35 centimeters off course. Sometimes, that is all engineering is, refusing to miss. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to 828 Meter for a new engineering wonder every week, and leave a comment below. Which megastructure should we explore next? See you in the next one.